Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This will be my second installment in the MCU Retrospective series. As I previously mentioned, since I've already seen all of these, we're going back through the series in chronological order. My first episode in the series, Captain America: The First Avenger, can be found on the channel in my MCU Retrospective playlist. You can also find other review videos that I've put out so far, like Oppenheimer and The Marvels. Next week, we'll be back to the normal review schedule, taking a look at Season 5 of Fargo. Thanks for stopping by, and if you like the content I'm putting out, please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, comment down below. Also, feel free to follow the channel on Instagram and Twitter. You can find the links to both of those in the channel's description. And without further ado, let's dive into Captain Marvel. I'm going to preface this right off the top. I'm not the biggest fan of this movie or this character. If you've already seen my review for The Marvels, you've probably already come to that same conclusion. While I did really enjoy The Marvels, I do discuss a handful of issues that I have with this character and her story as a whole. A lot of those issues stem from her debut in this movie. I don't hate this movie by any means, and I don't even think it's a bad movie. There are elements that I quite enjoy. I was really hoping that upon going back and doing a rewatch, I might find some newfound appreciation for it, but unfortunately that just wasn't the case. It's disappointing as well because I had a theory that maybe my displeasure with Captain Marvel could be explained away by its poor release timing. Think about it. This movie had to stand on its own, an origin story, released off the back of that gut-wrenching Infinity War cliffhanger. It had to craft a story that people would care deeply about, while in the back of their minds, all they can patiently anticipate was the release of Endgame. It was an impossible task for any follow-up to accomplish. But, after diving back into this movie, I am sad to say that I just don't think it's that well made. I think the foundation of this story is interesting, and I think the bones of it could have been organized in a manner that would have made this a more entertaining movie. Admittedly, I am a sucker for amnesia plot twists. I always think it's a thrilling and engaging way to progress through a plot. Upon first watch of Captain Marvel, that part instantly hooked me. It's always intriguing getting to learn plot points in the same manner that the main protagonist does. It's a cool way to let your viewer be a part of the movie and feel like they're doing more than just watching images on a screen. But the veil on that dropped very quickly. Because although it's not a bad film, it just isn't very enjoyable. It's difficult to say where it all went wrong because I don't think the blame can be laid on any one thing. As I said, the story itself is interesting. We follow Carol through her journey of self-discovery, well, rediscovery. A fighter pilot from Earth suffering from amnesia, fighting in a war she doesn't fully understand. When Carol's captured and taken hostage by the Kree's sworn enemies, the Skrull, her memories start to come back to her as they sift through her mind trying to recover a memory that would help them put an end to this war. All the while, Carol is being pursued by Yon-Rogg before all of the secrets are revealed. Carol was working with a Kree scientist named Mar-Vell to develop a light-speed engine that would in turn help the Skrulls escape the evil clutches of the Kree Empire. Spoiler alert, the real bad guys. In the end, Carol defeats Yon-Rogg, acquires the Tesseract, helps the Skrulls search for a new planet, and Nick Fury tags along for the ride. All of this is good, or at least it should be. The story is there, it just gets executed in such a boring fashion. And I hate saying that because I have nothing against Brie Larson personally, or the directors Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, but the buck ultimately stops at them. Look, Brie Larson is a good actress. Her Oscar for Room was well deserved. I tried to make the same point in my Marvels review, and I hope I'm not beating a dead horse here, but I just don't know if she is the right casting to play this type of role. People can and do say what they want about superhero movies not being real movies and actors just doing it for the big paychecks, and that's all well and good, but there are some very good comic book movies nowadays, and there are some very talented actors that have put their hearts and souls into a lot of these projects. I think sometimes as a society, we have this notion that because comic book movies aren't regarded very highly among film genres, that any actor, especially very good ones, can just sleepwalk through these roles. I think Captain Marvel is a great example of the contrary. Larson just doesn't seem like she enjoys herself in this role. Carol Danvers doesn't seem like she enjoys being a character in this movie. And because of those two factors, it's difficult for audience members to care about a character that the writers, directors, and even the actress doesn't seem to care about themselves. Carol constantly has this stone wall up, avoiding any emotional connection or relatable tissue between the audience and the character. She's overly serious, abrasive, and just all around dull. That would all be fine if we experienced some sort of character growth. And this leads me to the movie's biggest flaw. I think the team behind the scenes, along the way, confused character growth with character discovery. What I mean by that is we follow Carol through this story as she struggles to discover her true past and uncover who she really is. But along that journey, she doesn't really change. Sure, she learns to embrace her powers and live on her own terms, but that's not really a flaw. She just overcomes a force that is oppressing her, which is inspiring if we spend enough time with the character for that struggle to leave an impression on us. And in this film, we don't. We see one, maybe two scenes of Yanrog rebuking Carol for being overconfident and using her powers. And other than that, every instance in her life depicting her overcoming some sort of struggle is portrayed in very brief flashbacks. So we really never get enough time entranced in this character's struggle to care. People love Captain America in this universe, and you can say he suffers from some of these same issues, but if you watched my first Avenger retrospective, you'll see that I admit that Cap doesn't really have a character flaw in that movie. The difference between the two is that Cap has a developed personality that is inspiring. You empathize with him as he transitions from a nobody at the start of the movie to a symbol of hope and freedom towards the end. And we just don't get that same portrayal or character growth with Carol. Now look, I don't want to keep harping on Carol because even though I think this character is poorly developed, I think Brie Larson probably does the best with the material she was given. And she's not the only shallow character in this movie. Let's talk about our villain, Yanrog. I am a huge Jude Law fan. When I heard he was cast in this film, my interest was immediately piqued. I truly think he's one of the best actors working today. Going into this film, I had this image of him being this ever-imposing villain, chewing up every scene he was in, acting circles around the rest of the cast, and ultimately treating us to a memorable MCU villain, which don't come around all that often. Then, the reality set in. Yanrog, Carol's mentor turned adversary who manipulated her and concealed her true origins, succumbs to a familiar fate that awaits too many of our MCU villains. It's such an incomprehensible waste of incredible talent. Yanrog is forgettable, underused, and just plain boring. Even Law, with his incredible abilities, can't elevate this character to anything more than a background annoyance. Like a lot of details within this film, the overall outline for this character is good. A tyrannical military leader of a suffocating empire whose mission is to eliminate an entire alien race out of pure disdain. In this quest, he abducts a powerful young woman and exploits her abilities in an attempt to gain an advantage over his sworn enemy. That's a fascinating villain, and a captivating dynamic between him and our hero. But the film doesn't do anything with it, but waste it. All I can say is thank God to Sam Jackson and Ben Mendelsohn. These are the two standouts in this film. Sam Jackson returns as a young Nick Fury, and Ben Mendelsohn as Talos, the Skrull resistance leader. Sam Jackson is shooting on all cylinders. He brings so much commitment and charisma to this role, it's hard to not notice how much he cares about this character and this franchise as a whole. I think partnering him up with Carol was one of the best choices this film makes. When Fury is paired with Carol, Jackson is able to coax a fun and lighthearted side out of her character that we don't really get for much of this runtime. Their playful banter and constant teasing of each other, those interactions are the brightest spots in this film. As for Mendelsohn, I hadn't really seen him in much before this except Rogue One and The Dark Knight Rises, and I thought he was absolutely stellar in both. The same rings true for Captain Marvel. He plays his character so well. Beginning the film, he's guarded and defensive, cautiously keeping his motives close to his chest. This leads us to believe he could possibly have villainous motivations. Then, as we progress through the story, he opens the character up, becoming more vulnerable and charming as he learns to trust Carol and Fury, ultimately becoming an ally. When you discover his struggle, the struggle of his people, and how he just wants to find a home for him and his family, and to live in peace, you feel that. And that's a testament to Mendelsohn's acting. Outside of these two veterans, the rest of the cast is fine. Lashana Lynch is good as Maria Rambeau, Carol's best friend. She brings depth and emotion to the role, but we just don't get enough time or interaction with their respective characters to really feel the full weight of that relationship. Annette Bening is solid in her role as Carol's past mentor, and her personal vision as the Supreme Intelligence, but she's not really in the film a whole lot to leave an impact. Past that, the rest of the cast doesn't serve much purpose outside of what can be amounted to guest appearances. The other big downfall of this movie is the action set pieces, or lack thereof. I struggle every time when going back through this movie trying to set aside any memorable action set pieces. When Carol escapes the clutches of the Skrulls, blasting and punching her way through their ship, sure, it's fun, but it's not necessarily memorable. I can't say that it's the best choreographed action I've ever seen either. The train fight is fine, certainly too brief, and after that we go on a Nick Fury, Carol Danvers road trip for about an hour. Then we jump back into space and have another lackluster tussle on a claustrophobic space station that mirrors the first. Then we finally see Carol confront Yanrog one-on-one, and this fight is built up all movie, and finally we're going to be treated to an exciting and unique action scene. Nope. Carol tosses him aside in mere seconds. I wouldn't have an issue with this boss fight had any of these action scenes before it left any sort of impression on me, but they just didn't. I guess if I had to choose, the Skrull escape is probably my favorite, but even in that instance, I'm reaching. It's even more magnified by the fact that this came on the heels of such great sequences in Infinity War. So maybe I'm being a little harsh, but nothing really jumped out at me here. It made me say, wow, that was incredible. I think it's pretty clear based on my attitude so far that I wasn't necessarily impressed with the direction of this movie. I'm not too familiar with Fleck and Bowden's work. I've seen Half Nelson. While not directed by them, they did write and produce it, and I thought it was a great film. I also checked out Mississippi Grind, and I enjoyed it, but overall I thought it was fine, and I wasn't as high on that one as a lot of the viewers were. I just feel like with as many story, action, and character development issues as this movie has, it's hard not to point the finger their direction. Maybe the superhero genre just isn't their forte, and that's fine. I commend them for taking a crack at it. I just wasn't overly fond of the final product that they crafted. Visually, again, I hate to keep burying this film because I do enjoy it. But there isn't anything to really rave about. The cinematography is fine, the effects are fine. I'm just glad they're not an overly CGI'd mess like some of the MCU productions are nowadays. And for that, I have to give this film some sort of credit, but at the end of the day, there's nothing that just jumps out at you. Now, despite all of my critiques up to this point, this all accumulates into this fantastic post-credit scene. Towards the end of this film, we see an interaction between Fury and Carol, where Carol has modified Fury's pager to extend its range into space. She tells him to call her, but only if it's an emergency. cut to the post-credits scene of Infinity War, where Fury utilizes this pager before he ultimately disintegrates. Which leads us here. We get a glimpse into the aftershock of Thanos' actions. Steve, Natasha, Rhodey, and Bruce watch as the number of casualties continues to increase. They then notice Fury's pager go silent, only to be greeted by Captain Marvel questioning his whereabouts. I don't want to sound harsh, but this is the best part of this movie. All that was on anyone's mind at this point was Endgame, and that's not Captain Marvel's fault, it's just the truth. And this was a nice little tease to help curb that appetite. Ugh, Captain Marvel. This could have been so much better. You have the talent, you have an interesting foundational story, and you're riding so high from the release of Infinity War. I think Marvel came into this with good intentions. It's just unfortunate that it turned out such a bland and uninspiring affair. I have no ill will toward the directors of this film, I just don't believe they were the right choice for a movie at this magnitude. Just to reiterate, I like this movie. I'm an MCU fan, but I want to care about this character more. I want to love this movie. I want to be fully invested in this story and to feel a connection. And it absolutely pains me to say that I don't.